There we go.
Thank you all for coming. Welcome to Sitka Public Library. Brent Turvey is the director of the Forensic Criminology Institute, which provides postgraduate studies in forensics to students around the globe. He has a master's degree in forensic science and a PhD in criminology. He also has more than 20 years of experience as a forensic scientist, crime reconstructionist, criminal profiler, and expert witness for law enforcement agencies, attorney clients, and government agencies all over the world. He's worked for government agencies and universities in the U.S., China, Korea, Singapore, Colombia, Mexico, Spain, Ecuador, Guatemala, Portugal, Australia, and Scotland. Brent is also the author of multiple peer-reviewed textbooks on subjects relating to criminal profiling, forensic criminology, forensic science, criminal investigation, criminal justice ethics, miscarriages of justice, and law enforcement corruption. His latest book is False Allegations, Investigative and Forensic Issues in Fraudulent Reports of Crime, which we would have displayed up here, except it's checked out like just about all of his other books right now. Today he is here to speak about the psychology of lies and false allegations. Please give a warm welcome to Brent Turvey.
Thanks everybody for coming. I'm really excited to be here talking about this. We just published this book earlier this year, and I've been working cases involving false allegations probably for about, well, since I've started. Every case that I work on that involves a sexual assault is a potential false allegation. Whether it's a serial rape case or whether it's a standalone, you're always looking at that issue. That's just the way that it is. There are other chairs in a room over there that they can get access to. So if you guys need to do that, all right. So I don't want to try to. I don't have a political side on this issue. This issue has become a in the last few months, a very heated, timely political issue. And what I want to do is not draw you into the political issues that we're going to be talking about, that are going to come up. I'm not trying to take sides, because that's where we start having problems, is when we take sides, and we're going to talk about that as well. What I want to talk to you about is the responsibility of the justice system when it comes to these kinds of allegations and what that means for professionals like me, all right? So don't think in terms of, a side or right or wrong or good or bad or truth or lies. Think in terms of science and evidence. That's what we're going to be talking about today, all right? And of course, there are social issues that come along with that. So, just to be very quickly, the book that I wrote, I co-authored with Detective John Savino, who's retired from the NYPD. He was there for about 25 years, and then he moved on to work for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, where he is currently a captain of police in charge of 5 districts, to like 200 men or something like that. So we have my perspective, we have his law enforcement perspective, and also my colleague Aurelio Coronado. And if we're very lucky, in about a half an hour, he's going to join us via video. And you're going to hear about 15 minutes from him from Mexico. He's a forensic psychologist colleague of mine. So he brings the mental health perspective, which there is one. I've been asked already what my credentials are by some of the people here who don't really know me. This is who I am. I have a BS in history, a second BS, completely different degree in psychology. I have a master's of science in forensic science, and I have a PhD in criminology. My dissertation was turned into a textbook called Forensic Fraud. That's what I did my PhD dissertation on. But since the very first days of my master's degree, I was doing crime scene analysis, crime reconstruction, and profiling work in New Haven, working on serial rape and serial homicide cases as an intern on a task force. I got very lucky. When people ask me, they bring their kids to me, or they themselves come as students, they say, I want to study this, where should I go? And I give them the same advice. Find the person who's doing what you want to do, find out where they teach, and go there. The name of the university doesn't matter, the program name doesn't matter. What matters is who you study under and what they can teach you. And I studied under a little Chinese guy named Henry Lee, whose name you may or may not know. I hope you don't know it. Nothing good, kid. Anyway, no, Henry's a great guy. He's actually very smart. He's imperfect like a lot of us. All right, so I've written a bunch of textbooks. If you really care a lot about that, go on to Amazon, type in Brent Turvey. You'll see all these books come up. Some of them I wrote by myself, some of them I wrote with colleagues, but nothing I ever did alone, okay? So if you really want to know who I am and what I've done in terms of textbook writing, that's what I've done. Having said that, these are college textbooks. These are used at colleges and universities all over the world. And what that means is they're designed to teach people a subject. And very often I write them as a dual purpose thing, like either a professional manual / textbook, which means you can use it to teach a class, but it will also be used by professionals who are handling cases. It's the kind of book that once you buy it, you don't want to give it back because it has all the terms and definitions and protocols in it that you're going to have to follow throughout your career. And again, I didn't do this by myself. I did this with other people who are much smarter than me. That's the secret. They let other people make you look smart. Okay, so this is the mantra of the criminal justice professional. Right? It's very straightforward and very simple. The investigator's personal and professional dispositions will dictate whether and how objectively a criminal investigation is conducted and how crimes are investigated. Period. I always tell my students of criminal justice, there is no justice in the justice system other than you. It's just you. Because it's going to be your discretion, it's going to be your judgment that dictates at the scene, at the threshold level, whether or not you think a crime has occurred and who the initial aggressor is, and therefore who's going to walk away in handcuffs. Okay? That is completely up to the discretion of the police officer at the scene. It is not a lawyer, it is not a prosecutor, it is not a forensic scientist, it is a police officer who may have been on the job 6 days and have no real actual training. The justice that they bring as a human being is the justice that comes to that scenario. What that means is obvious. It's rife with problems. It's rife with issues that can be picked apart after the fact because it's not always done properly. All right. So we have to go in understanding that and accepting that it is the investigator's personality, their disposition as a human being, their character, their biases, their prejudices. All these things that will dictate whether and how well they do an investigation. And pretending otherwise is kind of disingenuous. They'll say, well, we always do this or we always do that. No, they don't. They make a decision based on who you are and what they think about you as to what it is they're going to actually do. Or whether they're going to actually do anything. Or whether or not you're the victim or the aggressor. I got a case right now I'm working where it's a homicide and another attempted murder, husband and wife, early morning hours of Christmas Day, 2011, and the only issue for me is who's the aggressor. Because they both are found stabbed. One died, one woke up with a knife in their chest in the hospital. And that one survived, and they charged that one. They have no idea who did what. They didn't reconstruct it, they didn't look at the evidence, they didn't do anything. They just went after the guy that woke up. So the question is, who's the aggressor? That is a basic, fundamental forensic question that the police will make a judgment call on, and maybe they're right, and maybe they're wrong. All right, so whether or not it's objectively investigated, whether or not it is thoroughly investigated, or whether or not it is investigated at all is up to the responding officers. They dictate so much. All right, so why are we even talking about this? Because there are duties of care that exist for different kinds of professionals. Whether you're a police officer or a law enforcement investigator, whether you're a sexual assault nurse examiner, medical and mental health professionals, attorneys, insurance investigators, administrators with human resources. Whether you work at a college, you work in a library, you're going to have an administrator, you're going to have a human resource person working for a building. All these people have protocols and guidelines that they're required to follow to meet their duty of care for their profession. And it's all written down somewhere for them. 9 times out of 10, when I encounter a professional, whether they're criminal justice or not, they're not going to have read their own protocols. I'm going to ask them, where's your protocol manual? They're going to pick up the book and they're going to dust it off and go, oh, yeah, I guess we do have one of these. So how have you been doing it until now? Well, just kind of based on their own personality and their own best guess, and their training that they got from the guy that had the job before them. All right? And why this matters is because, one, justice and fairness when you're at the criminal level, and then two, when you enter the civil arena, whether or not there's any responsibility on the part of a professional for doing a poor job. Was there negligence willful and wanton? Was there gross negligence? Or was there absolute negligence with clear and strict liability? Now, I know that sounds terrible, but here's the thing. The only way things get better, the only way people learn lessons is by being held to account through their liability. All right? I know that that's not always the way people see things. They think, oh, there's the criminal justice system, and if that doesn't work, well, if you're going to sue somebody for negligence, that's just somebody who's sue happy. Those of us who are old enough to know better understand that that's not how it works. There are two justice systems. The criminal justice system, which is the police, controlled by the police, wherein the victim is a witness, and the civil justice system, wherein regular people like you and I, that's where we get made whole. That's where we are actually doing the justice for ourselves, because it doesn't get done by the police necessarily. So all these professionals have specific protocols that they are required to follow. All right, they are required to follow them, and if they don't, there was supposed to be some kind of accountability. Most of the time, there's not. Let's be very honest about that. Most of the time, there is zero accountability for not following your protocols because you're policing yourself. All right, but these protocols do exist. They are required to collect it. I'll give you an example. A medical example. If they're doing an autopsy, they're not even allowed to come to a conclusion about cause and manner of death unless they have collected complete victim history, decedent profile information. Same thing is true for the sexual assault nurse examiners. Why? Because they are giving treatment. They are giving medication. They are giving painkillers. They are getting antibiotics. None of which they can do unless they have a tox screen. None of which they can do unless they have a medical history. And they certainly can't interpret wounds or injuries unless they know the timeline for the last 24, 48 hours and whether or not they've had some sort of incident that might have caused an injury that mimics what's going on and what they're seeing. So my point is, they all have these protocols and procedures they're supposed to follow in order to do before they render conclusions and render medical care. What happens? Most of the time, that goes right out the window. They see a person and they make a value judgment as to whether or not that person deserves the full weight and measure of their professional abilities. That is how it works. And it's only after the fact that we come back through there and we look and see that that has actually happened. All right? So, let's talk about this we're going to go through this as quickly as possible and try not to bore you to death. What I want to set forth for you, though, is I'm not interested in trying to get you to pick a side when it comes to false allegations. In fact, I'm trying to get you to think a particular way. And that is as a skeptic, as a scientist, as somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight. Now, let me explain something to you. If you start thinking that way, nobody's going to like you. You're not going to make any friends that way. But when anybody has an actual problem and needs a responsible adult, they will come to you if you think that way. All right? That's the important thing. Anybody who's going to be mad at you is going to be mad at you anyway, so just let that go. All right? It's true. All right. The first problem that we encounter when it comes to lying is truth bias. We have a huge problem with this, and that problem is we tend to believe people when they say stuff to us. We don't want to believe people. A lie takes two people, the liar and the gullible person. Right? It takes two people for a lie to work. Right? We have a general tendency or desire to believe other people and to think they're not being deceptive. Because especially if they fit a narrative that we love. If they're saying something that we want to hear. In fact, if somebody is saying something that we want to hear, our brain starts working a whole new different way. It stops looking for criticisms of that statement, of that opinion, and it starts looking for support. The contrary is also true. Our brain works exactly this way. The moment you start hearing something you don't like, whether it's true or not, you start looking for things in your brain to disagree with it, to prove it wrong. That's how we are. And I know that's how we all think. I think like that. You think like that. It's the way we are. It's getting out of that trap that's the problem. Truth bias is actually very helpful because it saves the time that's required from skepticism. If you're skeptical of everything and everyone, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy to think that way. And also, you're going to hurt people's feelings if you don't believe them right away. People are going to get mad at you. So you're preserving your relationships with your spouse. You're preserving your relationships with your children. You're preserving your relationships with your employers and your employees. All those people, you're preserving those relationships by just accepting the things they tell you at face value without challenging them. If you were to challenge everything that everyone told you, you would be miserable and alone. Right? Which, by the way, that happens. So it's not some bizarre reality. All right. So you can't do it all the time. It makes things easier. We have to accept something. Everybody lies. How did Lance Armstrong get away with it for so long? Anybody who's an actual scientist who actually worked in the business or actually knows anything about anabolic steroids knew that he was lying constantly about what he was doing. Knew it. It was not even a question. But there's so many people who love the guy. He had so many great social things he was doing, and he made so much money for everyone. That was one part. So that made people want to believe, right? People liked the guy. They liked him. That goes a long way in short-circuiting or allowing the truth bias to prevail, in short-circuiting skepticism. But more importantly than that, if somebody disagreed with him, he would just sue him. And he had the money and the means to go after them and destroy them if they disagreed with him, if they publicly said something, even if it was true. He had the money to sue and prevail, and he did several times. All right? He was vicious, and viciously went after those people who tried to tell the truth about him. So, it took a long history of science documentation and many people coming forward before the truth came out about this guy, and everybody argued anyway. Why are we so resistant? Why are we so resistant to this kind of stuff? Because we like it. We want to be liked. We like heroes. We like building them up. We like, especially if they say things we agree with, and they do things we agree with, we are going to forgive just about anything, so long as we can keep that image. Because that image of them has become part of our personal identity. So in protecting them, we're protecting ourselves. All right? So this truth bias is a big issue. Again, preserves relationships, and what it really does at the end of the day, in my view, is it helps people preserve the identity they built of themselves based on these things. All right? Second problem is confirmation bias. The tendency to search for, the second thing I talked about, when your brain works differently, when you're hearing things you agree with, you look for things and try to recall information in a way that supports your personal values and beliefs. And anything that doesn't, you ignore. Now, that's a problem. That actually is a problem if you are trying to find the truth, if you're a truth seeker. If you're a regular citizen, well, as long as you're not hurting anybody, it's fine with you. Do whatever you want. But if you have a job where your job is to find the truth and to seek justice for other people, for the community, this kind of thing is a problem. Because this confirmation bias, all it does is it's reinforcing your core values, and those are fine as long as it doesn't have anything to do with racism, sexism, your social beliefs, your political beliefs. There was a guy, I don't know if you guys remember this, down in an LDS leader, a fringe LDS leader named Warren Jeffs, down in Utah. You remember this guy? He was running around for years avoiding being arrested and avoiding warrants for the court because he had multiple child brides. I'm not talking like, 15, 17, 14, like 11, 12-year-old girls he was marrying. And this is considered a sex crime. It is considered illegal. He had multiple warrants out for his arrest. And the police, the sheriff's department in a particular area was helping him. They were giving him money and they were moving him from one hotel to the next. And it was because they had a religious belief that he was a prophet and that he needed to be protected. Their religious beliefs took over their duty to the community that they swore to uphold. Right? And that is on a grand extreme scale. It happens on a much smaller scale. I'm sure you can immediately think of examples all over the nation where that happens right now. Right? So it's not a problem that someone has personal beliefs. It's not a problem that they have things that they have as core values that are personal. But if they're in a position of public trust where they made an oath to serve the public or to serve the Constitution, and those things take precedence, that's when it becomes a problem. Especially if those things are in violation of constitutional rights, if they involve racism, sexism, that sort of thing. I have been absolutely amazed the extent to which these problems pervade our justice system, and it's only gotten worse over the last 20 years as I've been involved in it. All right? This is the problem. What do we do when we're discussing something with somebody, we're having a disagreement with somebody? We go on Google, we look up, we find something immediately that disproves them in our mind, and that's what we send. And we don't even bother to check where the source comes. It doesn't matter to us, as long as it agrees with our philosophy. Please, young ladies. Go ahead.
How was this guy able to legally marry all these
He officiated the ceremonies himself on his own compound and his own property. And they control the property, they control the compound.
Don't they have to get some permit from the state?
No.
They don't.
If it's a church and it's on their own compound, their own property, they're the only ones recognizing it anyway. So they're not doing it legally anyway. But that doesn't matter. They control the police. They control the clerk of courts anyway. Those are all people that are part of their group. Yes, it's very frustrating. All right, I lost my signal here for a second. I don't know why. We're going back. Okay. All right. So, a question in the corner. Yes.
Thank you. I
distinguish between the LDS Church and the Orange offshoot?
That's what I said. It was a fringe group. Like I said, it was a fringe group of LDS. It wasn't LDS proper. It was, like I said before, a fringe group of LDS. And, you know, he would not make the distinction, but we should, just to be very clear. So thank you for that. Although I did say it, I didn't probably say it loud enough. All right. So, moving on. The real problem at the end of the day, as far as I can see it, is gullibility. When our gullibility is too high, we believe things we shouldn't because they favor what we already believe and who we think we are as people. We are too gullible. That is the problem. And I don't mean that we're not smart, because we got a lot of smart people in this room. I'm a smart person. I like to think. I think I'm smart. My wife says not always, but you know, I really do try. But I'm still gullible. I still get sucked into things. Why? Because I trust people. And when I trust people, I allow them to short circuit my skepticism, my critical thinking. I allow them to tell me things, and I act on those beliefs. In my professional work, I never do that, but in my private life, I do it all the time. I always fail. Worse than that, I'm just as susceptible to things like advertising as you guys are. Celebrity endorsements, right? If it's a celebrity that I like, and they endorse something, immediately I'm thinking it's okay. Immediately I'm thinking, well, they would never say it wasn't true. I'm immediately thinking that, even though I know it's wrong. So I have to immediately, if I start doing it, my wife will be the first one to tell me that I'm doing it, obviously. But it is, anytime a celebrity is endorsing anything, even tangentially, even slightly, they are being paid a large sum of money for that. All right? If it's in the movie, they're being paid to put it in the movie. If they're doing it on Twitter or on Facebook or some other social media, Instagram, doesn't matter. If they're taking a picture with an object or an item, they are getting endorsements for that. So we've got to stop thinking that people who are trying to sell us stuff do not have an agenda. And the same thing is true of anyone else trying to give us information. All right? Trying to sell us something. Whether it's a politician who's running for office, or whether it's someone else with some other vested interest in an idea or an ideology. We have a tendency to believe people, again, because of the truth bias. The less experienced we are about something, the more we are likely to outsource that cognition. So let's talk about what lying is before I get Aurelio on. 6:22, we get 7 minutes. This is good. We're ahead of schedule. This is great. So, this is the part where I'm going to break everybody's heart in this room, okay? It doesn't matter what, we're going to talk about the different types of lies that exist, but all lying is morally equal. Alright? All deception is morally equal. You can't have it halfway. There's no halfway covenant with lying. Either you are deliberately communicating in any manner that's understood to be deceitful, or you're not. Either you're deceiving somebody, intentionally trying to deceive them, or you're not. Alright? The intentional telling of an untruth that is typically committed when a person realizes that the truth violates another person's expectations. Or another way is statements intended to mislead other people. All right? Now, you go look this up. You can find the Wikipedia page that will tell you that there are different kinds of lie: pro-social, anti-social, neutral, self-serving, blah, blah, blah. It's all lying. It's all morally the same thing. All right? But that's what it is. You're communicating in a way that is intending to mislead other people. That's what you're doing. Your intentions with this lie may be completely noble, but that is what you were doing. All right? But I'm not here. I'm not your priest. I'm not here to tell you that you're a good or a bad person because you're lying. Because guess what? Every day, everybody in this room lies to somebody. Is what we do. It's easier to function that way. I'll give you a slight moral out that'll help you with the lies that you're going to tell when you leave this room. Let me help you just a little bit to make you feel better about the intentional misleading of others that you're going to do. Not everyone is entitled to know the truth from you. Okay, if we can accept that, then that's a little bit of a sweat off the brow. That's okay. Ooh, all right. Not everyone is entitled to the truth. You are entitled to some privacy, and sometimes that privacy is going to take the form of you saying things that are not true. Because you know what? None of their business. That's why. All right? That's okay. The problem for me, and I don't care about that. I think privacy is one of those places where people should lie. You shouldn't tell me the truth if I ask you something you want to tell me. Or for example, a young lady at a bar and she gets asked for her phone number by a gentleman who wants to call her later. How often is she going to give out the correct phone number? She probably has the correct phone number to give out, but she probably doesn't give that out very often. Right? From her perspective, this is not something she wants to share or share lightly. So she's going to give a fake name, she's going to give a fake number, and that's a lie. But it's probably not a terrible lie. It's a, didn't hurt anybody except for the guy's feelings later on when he realized he'd been denied, but he's going to have to get over that. He'll be okay. All right? So I'm not saying there aren't different kinds of lies, I'm just saying they're all morally equal. They all have the same value. Cognitive outsourcing, that's the big one here. All right? Relying on others to do your thinking for you. When you start doing that, you are inviting, you're basically, you increase the chance you're going to be taken, you're showing a high level of gullibility, and you are inviting liars to your door, basically. I don't know how else to put this, so I'm just going to say it very clearly. There is no news network that does not have an agenda. Most of the time, you can listen to a news network, and they will give you some facts, but then no matter which station you listen to, they're going to spill over to start giving you opinions. You need to start right now discerning between facts and opinions, because what they'll do is they'll give you opinions as though they're facts. That's the danger. If you can't tell the difference, keep the TV off, because you're going to get riled up really easy. All right? If they're showing you live video of something, that's one thing, if it's actually been verified as live video. But if not, what you're hearing most of it now is not news, you're hearing opinions. And I know I'm going to say something very unpopular that I'm sure is going to make people mad, but I like news sources that are unfiltered. I like the AP, I like Reuters, I like the color and flavor of NPR. Some of it's biased, some of it isn't, but I think I can tell the difference. But I'm not the person who's going to listen to it and just go, oh, well, that's the truth, and just keep on going. I'm going to go and then I'm going to go do my own research on a subject. And if I say something dumb, my wife's going to do the research for me and show me that I'm wrong.
What about PBS?
It depends. I remember Frontline used to be so good. But the problem is it's about access. I'll give you an example today. And then we'll move on very quickly because I don't want to belabor this issue. Today, our president made a very controversial statement about other countries. I won't repeat what it is, and if you don't know what it is, go look it up. It was a negative statement about the state of affairs of other countries that in his view are of less breeding and character and class than those in the United States. The problem is if you don't leave this country, if you don't go to other places, you're not going to know what happens in other countries. And you probably shouldn't talk about it. First time I went to Mexico City, I couldn't believe how advanced it was. I couldn't believe how advanced the technology was. I couldn't believe how good the education was. I couldn't believe they had electricity. Why? Because I watched the news in the United States. And in the United States, you think that it's a third world country. It's not. Neither is Somalia. All right? These places actually have universities, and they have cultures, and they just have a different way of viewing things and living. And so if you don't travel to other countries, if you haven't specifically witnessed and observed things for yourself, and you're getting your information from here, it's colored in a particular way. And I use that word without intending to be clever. It isn't, but it is colored. First time I had that experience was I went to Singapore, and I was teaching the police there, and I turned on CNN International. It was amazing. They talked about other countries like they had infrastructure and electricity and plumbing, and like there were people there that mattered, and apparently there are. I didn't know that because if I had just gone off what I had been watching on my news, I would have been misled about that. So again, this is the kind of thing that happens. You outsource your cognition to other people, and that increases your gullibility. That's going to always be an issue, okay? I'm not saying anything more controversial than you should think for yourself. And if you have a problem with that, then we're already going to have a problem. So. All right. Now we're going to talk to her. I'm going to see if I can get Aurelio here. Hopefully he's listening and paying attention. But he's going to talk about lies about lying. One of the biggest lies you're going to ever hear is that you can tell when someone's lying just by looking at their face, just by talking to them. See if I can get him on here. Come on. Whoop. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. Sorry, you can only do this on Chrome. It's very strange. What? You can. All right. Here we go. Did this earlier with no problems, so there he goes. Hopefully he's going to pick up.
Hey.
Hey, Aurelio!
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I don't know if everybody can see you in here. That's Aurelio. He's a real person. Aurelio, say hi to all the nice people in Sitka. These are my neighbors. Don't make them mad.
Hey, everybody, hi in Sitka.
All right. So, Aurelio, the slide that I put up is this right here. Lies about lying. You like that?
Yeah, well, I cannot see you right now.
Oh,
Let me
correct.
see you.
Stop.
I can hear you.
That's right. That's all that matters. You don't need to. Can you see me now? Is that okay?
I cannot see you, but it's okay. I can live without seeing you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So talk to the people in this room about the lies that get told about detecting deception. Okay.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm very happy to be, connected with you. As you can hear, English is not my first language, so you need to play along with my broken English. But I promise you, it's going to be very quick. When we do the research for the book, we obviously want to know more about what's the state of art in different so-called methodologies in detecting lies. And it's very interesting to understand that most of the things that you can see in television or you can see actually using police force here in Mexico are not science. And we do research about the so-called lie detecting machine like the polygraph, and we do micro-expressions, and we do like non-verbal clues and all these things. And this is very important. There are no scientific evidence that these methodologies are good for using in court. That's the most important part. And why is that? Because this is only some experimental knowledge that we have, that some people with some context that is not the forensic context can, catch one lie or can catch one. And that's what I'm. Not the opposite problem. Of rape victims, of gender violence victims, or I work especially in case of people who suffer from police brutality, than go and with the justice system, and they don't get justice because they say you're lying. And that's the first thing that every psychology, every police, every expert do to a victim. They question the victim because they don't want to do the work. Because we have an overload system, we have a lot of crimes, and they want to work less, so they can concentrate in the political crimes. So in order to do that, they develop and they use this bogus science and start doing forensic expert assessment. So you have the rape victims, for instance, and they do an interview and they do a report that they say the non-verbal language is not that good, so we don't believe that rape victims, or the way she's not crying enough. That's a very common thing here. That the emotional aspect is not that good enough, so they don't. They cancel the old investigation. So that's the problem we have. And when we do the book, we talk a lot about this, and we say that with real victims and with victims that are doing false allegations, it's the same protocols that you need to follow.
Well, let me ask you this, Aurelio. You brought up something that I want you to explain. You're a forensic psychologist, and you've been trained in these areas. Where are the police getting their idea of how a real victim should behave?
That's a very good question. Actually, from ideology, ideology is these ideas that exist of stereotypes that we have about how women should behave, how men should behave, how victims should behave. And ideology is a mechanism that is transmitted by the media, by our families, by everything. Because you're talking earlier about how when we are in front of the victims, we tend to suffer because we don't want to think that the world is unfair, that the world doesn't have any rules.
Right.
And she can be a victim, I can be a victim. So I have cognitive mechanisms to start thinking, well, maybe she'd do something to be in that position.
Right.
And that's where ideology comes. So the idea they have about how some victims behave is totally cultural. And that's not the way to go. You need to train these people to understand how real victims in real context behave.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Aurelio. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for bringing it. I'll clean up whatever mess you just made.
I know I do a lot of mess, but thanks a lot for the invitation.
All right, buddy. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for having me. Say goodbye to the nice people. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. It's over there. He's a real person. All right. Thanks, Aurelio. I'll talk to you later, okay? All right. So Aurelio and I, we've known each other for a few years, and the message that he brings is a counterbalance to mine, which is that he deals with victims directly every day. I deal with crime scene and behavioral evidence indirectly every day. So it's a very different approach and perspective. But also, I live in the United States of America. And here we have very specific rules and protocols that are on the books that everybody's supposed to know, and there's supposed to be education, there's supposed to be training, so there's an ideal to follow. In Mexico, it's not like that at all. There is a complete and utter disbelief of victims who come forward. There's a complete and utter disbelief of people who claim to be not just disbelieving, but overt covering up of crimes that involve gender crimes, domestic violence, sex crimes, and what's called femicide. And that's why we formed the Forensic Criminology Institute, to give education and training on the United Nations protocols for femicide investigation. Because for some reason, they used my textbook as the basis for the protocols that they developed in Latin America. The United Nations did. So we wound up, that's why I keep going down there. The interesting thing that we have here in the United States, our problem is that our police don't have real training in these areas. So what they do is they fall back on their personal beliefs and what they see in movies and television. And that's the problem. They decide whether or not someone's telling the truth and whether or not someone is being honest and credible, or whether or not someone deserves justice based on these stereotypes that they learn from movies and television. If you don't believe me, just do a little reading yourself. Just start looking at the cases that have been overturned and why. Go ahead.
How often are polygraph tests false?
Well, that's a great question. Here's the answer.
Can we hear the question?
The question is, how often are polygraph tests false? Let me give you to a better way. The majority of the time when someone is being polygraphed, they're not even being polygraphed. The polygraph examiner hasn't even turned the machine on. They're just cold reading them. Polygraph to work, even according to their own guidelines, has to do 3 days of interviews and background before they establish a baseline with a person, before they can even talk to them and know what that baseline is, so they can determine what deception is for that person. If you haven't done your 3 days, if you haven't done your homework, you don't know anything. You can't go into a room cold with somebody and have them do a polygraph. Nobody does that. So every single time they do it, they're in violation of their own protocols in general. That's why, and the people who do this work are mostly law enforcement, not scientists, don't have a formal education. They've been trained that this is the box, and they get good at reading people. That's what they're interpreting, not the box. Okay? So they will tell people that they have, the tool that they use is, oh, you failed. When in fact you didn't fail at all. That's a very common thing to do, to manipulate people. So the answer, according to the literature that's published by the people who support the polygraph, it's wrong about 15 to 20% of the time. That's the brightest face they can put on that. There is no scientific methodology that would be allowed to be admissible in court if it were only right 80% of the time. or 85% of the time. That means 15% of the time, 1 or 2 times out of 10, it's wrong. So 1 or 2 times out of 10, you're sending someone to jail for something they didn't do. That's unacceptable. So that's why it's not admissible in court. It is used as a screening tool by government institutions, however. They still use it. And they also use it as a screening tool for sex offenders. Why? Because there are so many police officers who are certified in polygraphy, and so many agencies have bought this machine and bought this training. I don't think they have the ability to acknowledge that it's not valuable, because they get so invested in being able to be perceived as someone who can tell when someone else is lying that they don't want to give up that identity. Even though it's not a real thing. It's not based on science. It's not based on anything real or demonstrable. In fact, if you're telling people that you know how to tell when someone's lying, that's, to me, when I hear someone say that, I'm just embarrassed for that person. I just am. I'm just like, oh, you think that? Oh, that's not good. I used to think you were smart. But you don't read. Anyway, so, polygraphy is bad. The only thing worse than polygraphy is voice stress analysis. That doesn't even work at all. Even the polygraphers think that's nonsense. So we actually included an entire chapter on the science of these deception detective mechanisms so that you could get an appreciation of just how bad it is. All right? So let's talk about the motives for lying. What are the motives? Why would people lie? What's the advantage? Very simple. First, they either want to conceal a crime they've committed, or they want to conceal some behavior they're doing that's not okay, that you would see as negative or false, or you would judge. You know, we've all had teenagers, right? Right? Teenagers lie. That's what they do. Just learn to live with it. It's okay. They don't hate you. They're just lying to you. Second thing is punishment or revenge. They want to get back at somebody for something that they've done. So they're going to give a false report to hurt that person. Profit or material gain. That's a big one. In New York, the average settlement for an allegation of sexual assault against a property, a premises, is between $15 and $25 million. It's a huge financial incentive. But here's something else they don't tell you. If you're living in an apartment and you claim you were sexually assaulted, they will automatically, they're required to move you to a new apartment. So if you don't like the apartment that you're in, you can make this claim and get a free move. All right? Second thing is attention and personal sympathy. That's a big one. And that starts to dip into those who have a mental issue. And this is where I have a great deal of sympathy for people who are making false allegations, who have a mental issue and are doing it repeatedly. You know, these are the kind of people that need help. They need mental health assistance. And so identifying those becomes a big deal. Then there are those who do it for socio-political reasons. On the cover of the textbook, I actually put a case of a young lady who was a college student, and she made up a claim of a hate crime against herself because she was losing arguments in public that she was having on campus with people in classes over whether or not Trump should be president. So she claimed someone who's a Trump supporter sexually or committed a hate crime against her, and it turns out it didn't happen at all, and she got criminally prosecuted because that's a crime. It's a crime to make. That's a very important concept here. When you make a false allegation of a crime to a mandated reporter, and in some places just to a third party, it is an offense. In some states it's a misdemeanor, in other states it's a felony. All right? It's not a joke. So, terroristic reasons, to frighten and horrify people. It happens a lot with people who are in broken up relationships or are going through divorces, and they just want to terrorize somebody. They'll call in fake bomb threats, or they'll call in. There's one case of a lady who was a 911 operator, and she called in multiple swatting case, made multiple calls to 911 that resulted in SWAT going to the hotel room where her ex-boyfriend and the new girlfriend were having sex in one night, like 4 times. 4 times in one night. They responded each time with the SWAT. Crazy. Right, so to get an idea of just how common false allegations are and false reporting is, one needn't look no further than the 911 system in any given community. This is a young lady named Cassandra Ridley. She was just arrested this last week. I took all these cases from this last week so you can see this is all recent stuff. I don't like going back to the old. There's a lot of old popular cases you probably know about. Let's talk about ones that are new you don't know about. She was arrested in 2016 because she made more than 600 false phone calls to 911 in 1 month. Sometimes she's making 50 an hour. And they had to respond to each one. And she was doing it to different agencies, so they'd have to respond. And some of it, she's a meth addict. And some of it was to, basically she'd been arrested for other things in the past, and she just wanted to mess with police and drain their resources and take their eyes off of her. And she was angry. So there's multiple motivations there, from mental instability to revenge punishment. And she finally was arrested in 2017. She was out on bail for these 600 calls, and in 1 hour she made like 50 more. It's like last week. Crazy. Anyway, so complete. This is the example of complete deception. A lie that is completely false. Everything about it is untrue. There is no person being attacked. There's no person being assaulted. There's no crime at all. This is a total fabrication, right? Designed, perpetrated by somebody who is telling no bits of truth whatsoever. We talked about this before. Swatting is like that. A variation of the false 911 call. And this is where you say something to 911 that circumvents their emotional and procedural protocols. It gets them immediately to get their guns on, get their gear on, and go because they think they have to, because they think that life is at danger if they don't. In this particular case, this is two guys playing a video game. They were on a live streaming video game network, and they were talking to each other. And this guy was pissed off at the guy in Kansas. The guy in California was pissed off at the guy in Kansas. So what did he do? He called the local police and told them, gave the address that the other guy gave his home address, and said, at this address, there's a woman being held in a closet with a little boy. There's shots fired. They're going to kill him. You need to go there right now. And the police went. This is the body cam of the officer in Wichita that this guy got to respond. They responded. They drove there. It took them 10 minutes or so. On the way there, they're just getting geared up. They're getting excited. They get there. They park across the street. Somebody comes out, opens the door, and they say, turn around, put your hands down. The guy goes, what? And they shot him and killed him. Right on the spot. Dead. This happens all the time. This is not some new event. It happens to celebrities. It happens in the gaming community. It happens among others. The real question is going to be, what in the heck was SWAT thinking? Because before they even get there, they're supposed to be establishing communication. They're supposed to be safe. They're not supposed to be in danger. They're supposed to verify that the incident's actually going on. There were a whole bunch of red flags that this was completely fake. And not only that, the person whose name he gave doesn't belong to that address. The guy in Wichita had given him a phony address. So it was to some stranger, some guy who wasn't even involved in the video game, some random stranger. Yes?
It was on the radio. I heard the radio
Yes.
coming in tonight about 5:45, and they said that they have funding now to change this whole 911 system, supposedly so that they'll know if the call is out of that area at least.
I hope that's true. I'll believe it when I see it. But this guy would have gotten even around that. You want to know why? He didn't call 911. He called the security station at the city building, and they attached him to 911. So they didn't get the information that would come up on their system about where it was coming from. So you can do that, and that will help a percentage of the calls, right? But it won't help them all. If you're not following the policies and procedures of your agency and not establishing communication, doing the right things, you're going to wind up responding with violent force to a situation that doesn't require that, or to a situation that doesn't exist at all. So it's bad for everybody. I mean, this is really bad. And it's not just that it's bad and oh my gosh, we should feel so bad about it. It's bad and it keeps happening. That's the problem. Fool me once, okay, but man, this keeps happening. The police agencies are just not getting the memo. Why? Because their identity is bound up in the, they got the hero mentality. We got violence. That's what we're going to use, and we're going to solve all problems with violence. And killing people becomes the first option rather than the last. That's a problem. If you have a culture of any kind that values killing as the first option, you can predict this is going to keep happening.
What are you basing that statement on, that police value killing more than anything else?
I'm not basing that statement. Well, first of all, I said a culture. If you have a culture. Now that doesn't speak to necessarily. So let's talk about Sitka. Sitka is a community that's very small. It creates a very particular type of police officer. If you have another type of police culture, let's talk about Baltimore. Baltimore is at war with its citizens. That culture, the whole idea of dealing with the citizens in a nonviolent fashion is out the window. Same in Chicago. You get the same idea. So I'm not talking with a broad brush about all law enforcement.
But you keep saying police, which is a very broad brush.
Well,
That's every police officer in America.
Okay, but let me say this. If you were to talk to me about forensic science, which I am not, and you were to talk to me about forensic fraud in the forensic science community, I would not immediately get offended. Because I don't need to. That's not me. I have a real problem with fraudulent forensic scientists, those who perpetrate fraud using science and give false testimony. So if we want to talk about that, that's great. Let's have that conversation, and you won't even offend me for 5 seconds. we have to be able to have this conversation about law enforcement as well without there being this need to defend, to say that all law enforcement are under attack if you point out that there are bad ones. It's not how it works. We have to be able to have that conversation. So that's how I would respond to that. I keep saying police, because police officers have the statutory authority to respond to these things and have the judgment and the ability and the legal authority to end people's lives. And if they're going to exercise that judgment, they need to be properly educated and trained in the dispatch of those duties. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that, but in order to make it better, we have to be honest about when it's failing. And this is one of those areas where it's failing. So I appreciate the clarification, but we have to acknowledge up front, every police culture is different. Sitka is not LA. LA is not Chicago. Chicago is not, Virginia Beach, right? It's got to be, every place is different. Go ahead.
Okay, you made the same type of what I consider an opinion about opinions.
Sure.
When you talked about the news media.
Yes.
And I disagree with that 100%. Now, if I turn on the radio in the morning and listen
Yes.
to the local news,
Yes.
I'll get the news. I'll get the report of they'll have a video, or
Yeah.
not a video, but a reproduction of the sound. There was no opinion involved. They gave us the weather report.
Yes.
There was no opinion on
Well,
that.
no opinion in the weather.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, first of all,
And all I can say is, what about informed opinion?
well, obviously, I make my bread and butter off of formed opinion. You're calling me out on my own what I do for a living.
Yeah, right.
I believe in informed opinion. But I also believe in facts, science, and evidence. So if you have an informed opinion, it better be backed up by something other than I've been doing this 20 years, or I'm a police officer, or I work for this, and you can't possibly know. That's not how it works. In this world, there has to be some form of accountability and transparency, or else it doesn't work. So first of all, to your point, if you turn on the news and you hear the weather, well, first of all, that is an opinion, and it's often wrong, as you well know. or what they give it for is the whole island, not Sitka. But let's forget that. They give an audio clip of somebody who's being interviewed somewhere, and that event happened is true. It's how that's interpreted and how that's used and how that's colored and flavored and how that's edited that changes what it means and how it's taken out of context. For example, there have been so many times when I've been misquoted in the media. I've had cases where what I have said has been misquoted by, or where the quotes have been transposed by experts, or where they get my name wrong. Well, my favorite one of all time, I got it again today. Brent Turvey, former FBI agent. Why? Who says that? Nobody. I never said that, but they keep saying it. They repeat it. So there are these little details that get missed and colored, and they're not factually corrected that you have to check for yourself. Having said that, even the selection of the quote and the soundbite that they're using is a color. So it's a moment in time, not the whole picture. So that's how I would respond to that. And I would say, like I said before, some are good. Some are not so good. Some are reliable. Some are not so reliable. We learn over time, just like with people. We learn over time who's reliable and who's not. We learn over time which sources are sources we're going to go back to again, and which sources we're just going to start going, okay, well, that's somebody with a particular bent, and they've shown that over and over again. That's how I would respond to that. Because I do believe that there has to be informed opinion, but I also believe that should be clearly identified as such.
Well,
So,
certainly, that's
yeah.
what they do.
I hope.
Okay, you have a radio report
Yeah.
tonight. They give you the
Yep.
number of people killed in Bangladesh.
Right.
Or at the end of the program, they'll come up with some people who will comment on
Right.
the news of the day. It's obvious that that's opinion, or that is filtered through them.
Boy,
But the news itself is correct as it stands. Now, I know what you'll say. You'll say, well, they filter the news out. They only put the news on that they want to put on. Well, how much news can they put on?
Well, let me give you an example here. Not to pick on Tad Polson, who does an amazing job with a small paper, but that paper does not reflect what goes on in the community. It reflects what the community can bear. There will be pushback if you put the wrong kinds of things in that paper, things that go against tourism, things that harm the reputation of the community as being safe. So while a lot of the stuff that's in there is accurate, I would never say publish something that's inaccurate. I would say it's selective. And I know that to be true because I've been on the other side of it.
Oh, you were in the newspaper the other day?
I was so excited. And I will say this. She did a great job. She misstated what I was going to talk about, and she misstated what I was even going to say. But she got the French fry stuff right and the napkin right. So French fry was totally accurate. Totally did that. And these are things that are so minor it's not worth mentioning. She did a good job for what it was. Okay? Let's move on so we don't get too far. Half-truth. This is one from right here in this town. Right here in this town. So I'm going to lose everybody in the room over this one. I can feel it. A partial falsehood constructed contains the elements of truth to promote false information that is present. A young lady claimed that Mr. Robidoux had sexually assaulted her in a classroom at the junior high, right across the street from my house. Now I knew once I learned who it was, and once I knew what the allegations were, I knew that the allegations were going to have problems going forward. Why? Because as you will learn, that was reported in the paper, he was involved in a swingers group. The teachers and the administrators, everybody knew about it, everybody was doing it, and that became the bottom line of their defense. And that wasn't investigated and documented properly initially on. And then once it came out in the trial, he got acquitted because there was a prior consensual sexual relationship involving not just him, but other teachers as well. And this is not me giving you private information. I'm not giving names. I'm just telling you that was published in the paper. But we all know it. We all knew it at the time. All right? The half-truth is, yes, there was sexual contact, but there was a potential motive there for someone to give a false allegation. I am so curious how that case disposed out. I have no idea. I didn't follow it. I don't want to follow it. All I know is there was only going to be one outcome if people were paying attention. All right? So when we start acting like this stuff doesn't hit home or it doesn't matter, we're too small, and the people we know don't lie, that's not how it works. When we get angry, we say things we shouldn't say. When we are trying to defend our identity, our profession, or our way of life, our belief system, we do things we shouldn't do. Everybody does. Okay? It's just a question of, do we surround ourselves with people who are going to rein us in? And in this case, it just went too far, in my opinion. That is an opinion. The fact is, he was accused and he was exonerated. Whoops, sorry. Whoop, went too far. There we go. Exaggerations. This is a big one. Big fight in LA right now over what the real crime statistics are. We talked about crime stats, right? I love that you brought that up, not me. Because it is not uncommon for people for law enforcement agencies to fake crime stats, and it is not unheard of for people who do that to go to jail for making false reports. That's happened in Florida, it's happened in Philadelphia, it's happened in Miami, Florida, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and New York. Big states where there's big tourist dollars, and they want their solve rate, their clearance rate, is their report card, or the number of homicides, the number of rapes dictates local safety. And so those numbers get fudged and massaged. How do we do that? There's a little thing called downgrading. Instead of it being a sexual assault, let's call it a simple assault. Instead of domestic violence, let's call it something else. Instead of this, let's call it that. Let's downgrade it. And all of a sudden, this very violent felony becomes a misdemeanor that nobody cares about. Okay? That's how the stats are manipulated. That's just one way of like 100 ways. So there's a big fight going on between the chief of police and one of the captains. All right? Because he's saying the chief of police is exaggerating the truth in order to make it appear like it's safer and he's doing a better job than he is. Right? It's still a lie. It's still not true. Right? It's exaggeration. It is true that there's crime. It is true that it's bad. But the question is how bad and how much. Right? It's a fun and heated issue. We're specific to the issue of sexual assault. A pertinent omission. This is extremely common. Somebody tells all truth, but leaves out details which would change the perception of the people hearing it. In this case, this is a very big case that happened in England. There's a young man who's a criminology student, and he was accused of rape. He went all the way to trial, and the police had suppressed and held back all the text messages on the phone of the victim. How does that happen? I had this happen in a case I worked on in Colorado. In Colorado was a young lady who was seeing two men, and all the text messages back and forth between them documented their consensual sexual activity, and even that evening that was in question. We asked for those text messages. They said they didn't exist, they didn't have them, and then they sprang them on us during closing. Just came out of nowhere. So, we found them now, we have them now, and they, sorry, completely exonerated. Didn't mean to. Anyway, withholding stuff that you know will change the outcome or change someone's perception. Even though you've told nothing but truth, you've withheld information that would change their perception. Still lying. A lie of omission. Right? A pertinent Omission. Don't go at home and use this against your girlfriend or boyfriend. Come on. I know what you're thinking right now. You're just going to start a fight. That's a pertinent omission. All right. Let's just talk about this right here. This is fun. One of these people is a liar, a felon now. And one of these people is not. Based on these pictures and images alone, that kind of decision, you're thinking already about who's guilty and who is innocent, who's responsible, who's not, who you would like to see be punished and who you don't. I find the Kardashians so gross. It's a personal opinion. It's so gross. The whole everything they stand for is gross. Everything they stand for is phony. I totally get that. I also concede I know people who love watching that show, their show. I know they love it. And I get the entertainment value. But at the same time, I don't care. That has nothing to do with my job. I have nothing but utter respect for law enforcement and people who swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States and put their life at risk or take a lower amount of pay to do things, the jobs that I don't want to do. Nothing but respect for that. But if an allegation is made against that person, I don't care. I'm going to follow the same protocols examining her case as I am with hers. She claimed to have been the victim of a robbery at a little boutique hotel she was staying at in Paris. Does everybody remember this? And it went all over the world so fast. And within a day, everyone was saying she faked it. Everyone was saying she posted her jewels on Instagram and she, whatever happened, she did it to herself because she deserves it and blah, 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 and nobody believed her. There were actually places that said she made a false report. I think she collected totally for defamation lawsuits about $15 million over people who said that because she was abducted, she was duct taped, she was tied up, and so were the people that she was staying with. It was her driver and one of the hotel people that did it. All right, and all the documentation is there. It's just that we don't like her. She makes us upset. So we want to believe she's a liar, and we want to believe she deserves to be punished. So if these things happen, we're going to see headlines like that. She did this to herself. She deserves it. Or she's a liar. She's making a false allegation. This is a 911 operator. and she did the swatting stuff that I was talking about before. Mentally unstable like you would not believe. Nice lady, takes a nice picture, I'm sure, but that has nothing to do with the facts and the evidence of the case. Okay? So, what I want you to understand, and I'll try to leave it there for tonight. What I want you to understand is that we have an obligation to follow, we'll go back to here, we have an obligation when we're in the criminal justice system to follow the protocols. Remember when Aurelio said this earlier? He said, you don't know what the truth is at the outset. When you have a victim, when you have someone who's not a victim, you don't know. They're making an allegation. You do the same examination, you follow the same protocols every single time, because if it's an actual allegation of a crime that really happened, you're going to strengthen it. You're going to make sure that justice is done, and you're going to preserve it for trial and preserve it for a good prosecution. And if it's someone who's making a false allegation, you're going to expose that too. One of the big problems we run into, the political problem, we talked about the politics before. What are the problems with doing that? Well, here in a small town, for example, some people don't understand that making a false allegation of a crime is actually a crime. And if you don't have the police officers with the correct training, they might not understand that. So they might not make an arrest. They might not want to put the cuffs on someone that they like who's making a false allegation. More to the point, let's say they know for sure it's a false allegation, they know for sure it's a crime, but they have a really good relationship with the victim's advocate, and the victim's advocate believes the person making the complaint. So they just decide in that case to use their discretion and not put the cuffs on the person because they don't want to upset the victim's advocate, because it will make their job more difficult. All right? Politics. Has nothing to do with reality, it has to do with preserving those relationships. Yes, sir?
So I'd like your opinion. You're informative. Do you think people that make false allegations should be arrested and charged?
Every single time. Every single time. If they're not walking out of their cuffs, it is an absolute message to the rest of the community that it is okay to waste the finite resources that we have to manage our community in the face of real dangerous crime. That's the first thing. But there's a second part to that. Because what you didn't ask is whether or not you thought they should be punished. They should be arrested, and then the court should figure out whether or not they need punishment, because they're doing it a lot of times and they got a bad motive, and they want to inflict that harm, and they're doing it carelessly and recklessly, or if they have a mental problem, and they need help. Right? You can't, once we invoke justice, it can't be, in my view, it can't be arbitrary. Now, here's the problem. I'm sure there are people in this room with a different opinion. If you make the claim, you got to do the time. That's fine. That's one way. That hard line is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is everybody who's making those claims, they need help of some kind. Therefore, we have an obligation to believe the victim and treat them as the belief, not question it. Here's the problem with that. I'll give you the case I worked on in Oregon. Oregon versus Kevin Driscoll. This is a young man who was a engineer for the Federal Aviation Administration. He got drunk with a bunch of him and his buddies. They all went back to his hot tub, and there was more drinking and blah, blah, blah. Long story short, a young lady accused him of sexually assaulting her. All right? Long story short, the drug dealer next door had videotaped everything because he had videos running all around his house. The police arrested Kevin Driscoll based on her word. She said, he attacked me, he bit me, I was bleeding, he held me down, he restrained me, he bruised me, this, that, and the other. They interviewed Kevin Driscoll. He had no bruises, no bite marks, no nothing. He was completely compliant. But the law in Oregon says this. You don't need anything else other than the victim's word to get a warrant. So the police got their arrest. The Deschutes County made their arrest. And their attitude was, this is now the court's problem. They tried Kevin Driscoll the first time, it hung. The second time I got involved, and we were able to get some evidence in that a little bit better than it got done the first time by the first attorney, and ask the right questions of the opposing experts, and basically draw out that victimology and find out she had changed her name. She had been convicted of committing a false allegation in the past and changed her name and moved down from Washington so that you couldn't find that out about her upon first blush. And the other thing is all the problems with her story that weren't true, and she ultimately had to admit that the whole thing was fabricated. The police could have avoided that by simply doing their job and following their protocols and not making the arrest just based on her statement. So there is an attitude among some in law enforcement, and that again, every agency is different and culturally, like we have a particular leadership that tolerates a particular type of behavior in Sitka. There is a completely different leadership in LA, completely different leadership in Baltimore, in Louisiana, everywhere else, different leadership. That culture is different. But the culture, there are some cultures in law enforcement that have this attitude that if I can make the arrest, it's not my problem. It becomes the court's problem. That needs to go away. We need to be better, more skeptical stewards of the science and the evidence and do the investigation so that everybody is protected. The accused, the victim, the false reporters are identified. It's a very straightforward thing to do, but once emotion gets involved, it gets short-circuited, just like the swatting case, right? There were cases where, albeit I was in a room one time working on a rape case with a police agency in Arkansas, and we were having this conversation about this one thing, and this young Asian lady comes in, and every single detective fell over themselves to try to help her. Every patrol, everybody wanted to get her coffee, wanted to make sure she was okay. She was not unperturbed for the entire time she was there, and everybody was listening to her give her statement. A black prostitute comes in, she waits 25, 30 minutes before somebody even talked to her. Right? She's not attractive to them. She's not deserving the justice to them. Not every agency is like that, obviously. This is that agency. This is that circumstance. It exists. That kind of judgment exists. And so because that's true, and because it can result in wrongful prosecutions and wrongful convictions, and those are the kind of cases I get involved in, that's why I think this message is so important. We have an obligation to understand the need for following these protocols. These protocols are not a joke. They're there to protect everybody. And if in your mind you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm always going to believe this or I'm always going to believe that, well, that's part of the problem. You're not in the business of belief if you work for the justice system. You're in the business of investigations and proofs. So that's where I want to leave it. I don't want to, like I said, I'm not here to take a side. The side is the evidence. The side is we have these protocols. Why are we not following them in every single case? Because too many people are using their peculiar personal biases and judgments to not have to do their job. And then they spend more time defending their failure to do their job than they do actually dispatching it. That's an even bigger tragedy, as far as I'm concerned. Any other questions? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I'm curious, how well do the protocols actually work to prove that those things that the allegations are actually happening as well? Because, obviously if you're a sexual predator, you're doing the best you can to hide everything you're doing.
I never worked that case before. What I can tell you is the sexual predator is not, unless they've been inside and they've gone to college, as we say, and got some forensic insight, they're going to make mistakes that are going to be caught. And I don't mean like identifying and apprehending. I mean in terms of validating the version of events being gave by the person who's saying that they were sexually assaulted. Following the protocols there. It's not always, not every case is going to be able to be solved, that's for sure. What I'm talking about is making sure that we have identified someone who's making a complaint, given them a space where they can come and make the complaint safely, right? And then treated them professionally and with respect so that their statement is taken, and then follow the protocol to collect and document evidence such that if it is a case, if it is a legitimate case, that case can go forward. And if they're not telling the truth, then that comes out and gets dealt with. Is that truth because the crime didn't happen, or is that truth because they're lying about some sexual behavior they're embarrassed about, or some other thing? Because people lie all the time when they're making complaints, but it's not necessarily because it didn't happen. It's out of embarrassment. So, in terms of, I don't know what you mean by success. If you mean in terms of resulting in arrests, that's investigative ability. That's a whole other area. I'm talking about just going in and preserving and documenting the statements properly, the evidence properly, and the making sure that we can validate the complaint at a threshold level. That to me is the first level of success we have to clear. And if we did that more often, I think we'd have more clearances. Because right now, there's a fight among crime labs. Again, they had it 20 years ago. They're doing it again. They're arguing that it's not important to test all rape kits. We don't need to test all rape kits because not everybody is a suspect, and we don't always, unless we have a suspect, there's nothing to compare it to, blah, blah, blah. Like, have you not heard of CODIS? Do you not know what CODIS is? If you put the DNA into the database, you can identify whether or not that person is responsible for other crimes that you know the perpetrator is, or whether or not there's a pattern offense going on. That's a big deal, but you still have crime labs fighting over this issue. This is from last week. Still people saying stuff like that. So just following those protocols would be a big deal.
I feel like that
go ahead.
black prostitute that got ignored.
Sorry! I'm not ignoring you.
You certainly are.
No!
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You have the floor.
This is not fresh data.
Right.
But it is particular to Sitka. I worked in social services when I first came back to town for Sitka Tribe of Alaska. And one of the people that I worked with was a middle manager for State Division of Family and Youth Services. And she said, per capita, Sitka had more false reports of people against people with regard to the need to take children out of homes than any other community in Alaska. It's not scientific evidence, but it's anecdotal evidence from a middle manager. And I think that's relevant. And
Yes.
I don't know how it is now. That was around 2000, 2002. But there's something terribly wrong with that.
I appreciate the viewpoint, first of all, and I'm really glad, I am really grateful to the community of Sitka for providing us this space so we can even have this conversation. So that's a big deal. We get to even have this conversation and hear each other and see each other as people. So thank you for coming out for that, and thank you for telling us that. I have no way to verify that. All I can say is I would have the same response if you told me it was absolutely true and you knew it, or if you told me the exact opposite, I would have the same response. We have to follow the protocol. We have to train people to follow these protocols and follow them the same way every time so that we have that documentation every time so that the claims can be validated or refuted up front so innocent people don't get railroaded and guilty people don't go free. I totally agree with you. And it is a classic abuse of the justice system to make false allegations that are of high emotional content so that people will have their good judgment short-circuited and not follow protocols and go, well, let me just take care of this, dear. We'll just take care of you, and we'll just pretend that I don't have a professional obligation, and we'll just skip you to the front of the line instead of doing it the way that it should be done. So thank you. I think being aware of the fact that there are people that think that that happens, that says something, and that tells us that we have to do a better job. So I appreciate it. Jeff, go ahead.
Have you read Distinguished Professor of Psychology, Elizabeth Loftus?
I have. I've worked with her on about 3 different cases.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
She's
also got her husband, her ex-husband, Jeff Loftus. He does the same stuff on wrongful witness identification. I work with him as well. But she now works, UCLA, right? Down there?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's very good.
Well, yeah. Well, any comment on her work?
She got in big trouble over the Scooter Libby trial. Remember that? She got hammered because she couldn't remember her own research and the findings. And so in the Scooter Libby trial, in the Bush era, she got nailed to the wall. Well, you know, if you're an expert witness and you get up there and make a fool of yourself, it's going to happen. She's a very smart person who's done some incredibly powerful research, and everybody in this room should read it if they care about the justice system. It's basically wrongful identification, eyewitness ID problems. Especially with what we're talking about. I think you're probably trying to draw the connection to the racial issues. She has the cross-racial issues. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about your constant referrals to the protocols.
Yes.
Do these really exist?
Yes.
Do they vary across jurisdictions?
Yes, they do exist, and they, not only do they vary. Okay, first of all, NIJ has crime scene investigation protocols that they publish.
Sure.
Everybody's supposed to follow.
But does the city of Baltimore ever say, yes, we're going to follow this?
No.
Or does anyone ever say we're going to follow what is recommended at a...
When they're doing things that are right, they say, look how well we follow the protocols. And when they do things that are wrong, they say, we don't need to follow the protocols.
Right.
For example, if you're a medical examiner, the there's only two organizations that board certify medical examiners, the College of American Pathologists and the National Association of Medical Examiners. Both have autopsy protocols. The NIJ has autopsy or medical legal death investigation protocols. They all require collecting decedent profile information and collecting rape kits and all this kind of stuff when there's a sexual assault that's suspected. Those protocols don't even get followed at all. Like, they're just outright ignored. And the refrain is constantly, we don't have the time, we don't have the money. Yes, those are the best protocols. And I have no problem with that. What I always say is if you're not going to follow your own or an agency like Sitka PD, they got a whole manual of protocols they're supposed to follow on different things. If they're not going to follow their protocols on a particular issue, great. Say that up front and have your people do it up front. Go into court and say, look, we collected this evidence, we did the best we could with our investigation, but we don't really have enough money to follow our protocols. So this is best we could do. Instead, what they do is say, we don't need to follow the protocols and it's not necessary and I've been doing this 20 years and blah, blah, blah. That's the problem. So yes, the protocols exist. Every agency has its own. There are national protocols, there are regional protocols for this kind of stuff. Nobody follows them. They just don't do it.
Because they don't have any legal authority.
That's exactly right. Well, and the legal authority rests with the police agencies at the threshold or with the medical examiners at the threshold to be the people who are in charge of collecting and documenting evidence. What that leaves it to is the defense community or the private community, the private scientific community or the civil justice system to hold them accountable for not doing it. And what happens? Good people like us in rooms like this wind up paying through the nose for the results of lawsuits where people didn't follow the protocols. Right? So yes, they exist. Your questions are all totally valid. Totally valid. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, you're talking about the system that you recognize as a science. Okay, where do you start with the observation, the hypothesis, the theory, and the review?
Well, that's the scientific method, is what you're describing.
Of course it is.
There is only one, and if you're not using the scientific method to develop and generate knowledge...
Show us how this follows the scientific method.
Well, these are the people that have protocols they're supposed to follow. And I'll give you an exact example. Before you can come to reach a conclusion, correct, you must first collect data. I had a case one time of a young man who was a boy, 2 years old. He was found dead in a hospital. The medical examiner declared it a homicide, did not examine 3 days of history leading up to that. It's in the protocols he has to do that. He didn't do that. Why? Because he liked his opinion that it was homicide, and so did the prosecutor that was prosecuting the case. He refused to accept the 3 days of treatment data that led up to it, even when he was confronted with it on the stand. He was not behaving in a scientific fashion. If you have a scientist who's giving a scientific opinion of any kind, they have to demonstrate that they understand the scientific method and that they used it in their findings. And that means they have collected data prior to actually forming theories, and they have beaten up those theories with multiple hypotheses, and the ones that survived are the ones they're bringing to court, not the ones they like. And that is in essence how, but at the same time, I believe there's another part, the transparency part, which means if you're a scientist, a practicing scientist, you should be publishing, and those ideas should be up for review all the time. That's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to publish ideas and work with other people, so that you're constantly having your ideas checked and reviewed, and you're constantly putting your ideas out there to be criticized by others. That's part of the process as well.
What about peer review?
That's what peer review is. If you're talking about blind peer review in a journal setting, that is a myth. It does not even happen. And you and I both know that. So first of all, the second, the way, peer review means different things to different people. Blind peer review is where you submit an article to a journal and then it's reviewed by a board of people who evaluate it. I've served on those boards. I serve on one now. If you are not capable of identifying the author of an article blindly without the name on it upon first glance, you are not an expert enough to be evaluating that article. That's how I feel. Because if I see an article without the author's name on it, I know who it is by first 3 paragraphs. If you don't know that, so there is no blind review if you're any good at your job. But I do believe in peer review in terms of putting stuff out there and constantly having to respond to the professional community by virtue of publication, by virtue of testimony and experts and counter experts. Here's the fun part about what I'm saying. Nobody disagrees with what I'm saying until they're in the hot seat not having followed their protocols and somebody's dead and they're being sued for it. Okay? Nobody. So it's not a problem until there's liability. That's when people start disagreeing. Go ahead.
Well, the kind of thing I don't understand is in Sandra Bland's case. When they have a video of him following her just because she was black.
Yes.
The first video, not
Yes.
the second video. Why isn't that evidence right there that he is at fault and he should bring a criminal? I don't
Okay,
understand.
so what you're talking about is what we call rolling the dice, affectionately. If a case goes to trial, I'm going to use some spicy language, but kids can't. The case goes to trial, to me, in my mind, I've been doing this long enough. If I see a case go to trial, that means to me, somebody on one of the sides is being an asshole. Alright? That's what that means to me. You should never take a case. The case should never have to go to trial. Reasonable people should be able to figure this out before a case ever goes to trial. It's going to trial, somebody's being unreasonable. Alright?
Talking criminal or civil?
I'm talking criminal. Okay. Civil, that's a different animal, right? Completely different animal. So, in criminal cases, if they go to trial, and you have a jury votes their emotions or their feelings. They don't always vote the science. They don't always vote the evidence. They vote based on... There's a really great social media cartoon that I saw the other day, and it was a defendant saying something on the stand, and you had all the jurors in the box, and they all had their like buttons up with their phones. Like. That's what we've turned into. We are deciding people's fates. What did I say before about Kardashians? We're deciding whether or not she's guilty based on whether or not we like her. You cannot let that be the thing that determines your course of action. As a citizen on a jury, certainly not. Certainly as a person in the criminal justice profession, you've got to treat everybody the same. I get the same treatment as you, and you get the same treatment as her. We all get the same treatment or it doesn't work. When people start deciding who gets the good justice and gets the good, who deserves to get the correct verdict, that's the problem.
But he wasn't even arrested for that part of it.
I know. There's people on a jury can vote how they like.
No, but he didn't get brought to trial for that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yeah. That is... Okay, so here's another fun part about it. The prosecutor, the police has discretion about who they're going to arrest in certain cases. Some cases they're not supposed to, like domestic violence cases. Everybody talked to you about before when I had a disagreement with Chief McClendon. The disagreement I had was he had a number of officers and employees who were committing domestic violence offenses, and they weren't being arrested. There's a mandatory statute for arrest. I actually had him and one of the officers say to me, there's no mandatory arrest statute in Sitka, or even in Alaska. I reached into the library, pulled out the book, pulled it out and showed him right there. It's actually called a mandatory arrest statute. But they didn't want to arrest him because they like him because he's one of their own, it's going to be scandalous. So that's the problem right there. So first you have discretion being applied. And then if you don't have accountability for when they misapply that discretion, there's a problem. And then prosecutors have discretion about who they're going to charge. And if it's political, they will take the case to a grand jury, right? Now, it's very easy to indict someone with a grand jury because there's no defense there. Very easy to do it. So what do? If it's a case they don't want to try, they go to the grand jury and they tank it on purpose so they can come back and say, well, grand jury can't make up its mind. I'll give you a big famous case where this happened you probably don't know about. Do you remember the young, what's her name? The young blonde girl who was killed in her house, John Benet Ramsey? Remember how they took the parents to a grand jury? And the prosecutor came out and said, lo and behold, the grand jury has spoken. They refused to sign a true bill. They're innocent. I have to let them go, right? That's not what happened. 2010, all the grand jurors finally got together and put their middle fingers up in the air to the prosecutor and said, you've been lying for, X number of years. We signed it. You refused to sign it. We wanted you to arrest them. You refused to arrest them. all right? So there's all that kind of politics that goes on that, you know, that allows the system to be manipulated in a way that fits people's narratives, that fits people's political ideas or their personal beliefs, or what makes them comfortable and happy. And that's the kind of sausage being made stuff that people don't like looking directly at, but it's out there. And that's just one case that I just think of off the top of my head. Go look it up. It's infuriating. Go ahead.
So what happened when the grand jury called? There's nothing to.
Prosecutors is the ultimate authority in that region, but they don't police themselves. The only way to have a prosecutor's office shut down and cleaned out is by the FBI. Federal charges. That's right.
So could someone, if they wanted to pursue? No, so it really wasn't.
No, it's the law enforcement in that area has the ultimate authority over that case. Right? So if you have that law enforcement, they're in the realm of that prosecutor. Right? Now think about how many, if you study that case, think about how many people have been put in charge of that investigation and left. Put in charge and left, put in charge and left. Why does that keep happening? Because those people get there, try to work the case, and they get made miserable. All right? It's a very common thing.
Well, then are you under obligation to arrest the police chief for not arresting the...
I don't have the arrest authority.
No, but you work for the police department.
I don't have arrest authority. No, I was in a special commission when I worked there, and only for a particular case. But here's the point. I did inform the assembly, and they did nothing. The assembly in this town is the ultimate civilian authority that oversees the police. So they have that authority. They can fire. They can't arrest them, but they can fire. But it comes down to likability. He ultimately ran out of town and, you know, quickly made his exit right after those allegations came out. So, I mean, that's your answer right there. But my allegations had the desired effect.
So I want to take this the opposite direction.
Yeah, please.
Say you are a woman who has been
Yes.
either sexually assaulted or sexually harassed,
Yes.
and you're trying to make sure, you know, you've had the experience of the person doing it in a, let's say, a walk-in freezer where nobody's going to hear you.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Stuff like that. How do women or men protect themselves and make sure that they don't get called a liar?
Boy, well, first of all, that is a great question, and it is. I mean, you're going to be judged on your character and your history. That's the way it is. There's no getting around that. There is Rape Shield, which prevents your prior acts from being used against you as long as it doesn't interfere with the evidence being admitted that's relevant to the particular case. If you have a situation like that where there's no witnesses, you're going to have, first of all, if you get processed right away, if you make the complaint right away within the 72-hour window, there's going to be evidence of the interaction of the exchange. If you're in a walk-in freezer, I'm going to presume you're on a premises that's a business, correct? So there are going to be logs that you were there. There are going to be timesheets. There are going to be some documentation for everybody to get paid that you were there at a certain time with a certain other person. So these elements get put together, they get built up as evidence that two people were at the same place at the same time. Then the next question is, did a sexual assault occur? And their sexual assault protocols are very clear, they're very thorough, and they're very extensive, and they're very good at documenting evidence. But nobody reads them or they don't follow them because they don't know how. If you go to, like, say, well, it's like DNA, it's like anything else. You're only as good as how many you do, you're only as good as your experience. And the problem is, if you believe there's not going to be evidence or you don't feel like doing your job and following the protocols, you're not going to do the documentation. You have to be an advocate yourself. We developed a protocol specifically for victims of femicide so that they could learn how to negotiate the morass of government interference in their cases in Mexico, because that's a big problem there. You have to be proactive. You have to have hope that you've got an investigator that's worked a sex crime before, that actually knows how to interview victims, that actually knows how to interview suspects. And you have to be proactive in documenting your own stuff and documenting your interactions with them. You can't let it go by the wayside. It's a frightening prospect. I know, and it's not what you want to hear. But there are not enough people who have that kind of experience. Not like those people that have enough training. Not enough people. I mean, we remember here in Sitka, there was a lady who was a meter maid one day, and the next day she got put in charge of a homicide investigation as a detective. The next day, because of a change in command. No training, no education, no experience, made in charge of the homicide case. Who made that decision? It was a very political decision. It was based on somebody who liked her, who wanted to see her rise up. That's great, but if you don't give her the right training, she's going to fail. She didn't last very long. Just the way it goes. You have to have the right people. You have to be proactive. Even then, if you're working with the wrong agency, they're going to work against you. So, I mean, that's some special problem. I wish I had those answers. I mean, I don't. I can't go back and say, oh, we can fix all this. No, they're the protocols that exist, and all you can do is be forearmed with the idea that these particular professionals have protocols they're supposed to follow, and make sure they follow them. I mean, let's be honest. We have the same problem with healthcare, right? Getting your doctor to examine you. I mean, I've had situations where I've had to demand that a doctor put their hands on me to examine something that they just wouldn't even touch. You know, getting a doctor to follow protocols is hard enough, right? And they're a trained medical professional. They know the difference. If you're dealing with somebody who's fresh out of the academy and they're still in training and this is their first sex crime, it's going to be rough. They don't have the right leadership. They don't have the right training. It's tough. But these protocols do exist. And that's one of the reasons why I like having these conversations. Because I want us all to be, because we are our own little island, right? We are here, and we are a community of people that have to rely upon each other a little bit. And we have a police force. Some of them are very good and very well trained. Some of them are new and getting trained, and you don't know who you're going to get. We have what? How many detectives do we have? 2?
Yes.
Yes. 2 detectives, 2 full-time detectives.
I think you think I'm with SPD.
I'm not. I don't. Okay. So I know exactly who. It's okay. I don't think that. I was relying upon you. I was trying to. I know how many detectives. Yeah, I think it's 2. No, I don't think you're with us. So I think there's 2. And my point is that not all of them. They get this. It's a job title, not a position they get by training. All right, and there's not a lot of enough cases here to get people to the level of experience that we would like to handle these kinds of cases very well. So very often when they're processing somebody, they're reading from the instruction manual. All right? I don't know how else to tell it. That's just the way it is. Yeah, go ahead.
So, maybe a little on the political side, but
No,
for the past several months, all the allegations that have come out.
Yes.
And some, all of them have merit. So I don't want to, I'm not saying some are worse than the others.
Yeah.
But there haven't, protocols haven't been followed.
No.
A lot of this happened in the past. So what's your...
Well, first of all, let's distinguish between as I was talking to the reporter about this, I wish you mentioned a little bit more about this in the article. The Me Too movement. I think it's a thing that has great merit. Because what did I say earlier this evening? I love that Sitka has created this safe space for us to all come together as citizens and have this conversation together without hurting each other. We are all here because this is an interesting topic and we all care about our community a little bit and how this might apply to our community. That's what Me Too does for people who don't have a community like this. I look around this room, I see a lot of people I know and respect that I've known for years. And I'm getting to know better. Right? Somebody who's been sexually assaulted, the first thing that happens to them is they feel alone. They feel miserable. They're going to go to their family and maybe their family's going to be supportive. Maybe their boyfriend or their husband's going to be supportive. Maybe not. Maybe the culture of their family does not respond well to these kinds of incidents. Or maybe they're just, they respond selfishly in an unsupportive way that isolates the person who this has happened to. So for whatever reason, they're alone. And they don't feel like they have the support to say things out loud. But when people of note and celebrity come forward and say things, and a space is created, whether it's online and virtual or in a community like this, a space is created where they can actually say something and not feel judged, not feel completely, totally fucking alone, that's good. So that I think is good. That's a social outlet for people to say things in a way that gives them some empowerment, some agency is the word I was looking for the other day. The word agency. They need agency and they don't have it. That is different than going and making a claim to law enforcement or reporting it to a mandated reporter that they have been sexually assaulted and it's a crime that's happened within recent years and they would like an investigation done. How do we know this? Fun case going on right now. Everybody following the Sylvester Stallone allegations? In the 80s, while filming First Blood Part 3, right? He was in Afghanistan and he took a young lady with him. And she's now claiming that he raped her. And she's claiming this, she took this to law enforcement. And he said in November, he said, not only did I not do this, but if she is proven to be a liar, I want you to arrest her for false reporting because it's a crime. And not only have they demonstrated that it's not true, they're now investigating her. Okay? So that is a different context. There is a social context, and those comments and those statements have to be taken with a grain of salt. And then there is a legal context where there are real consequences and real stuff going on. Now, where's the middle ground, right? This is the weird middle ground, the Harvey Weinstein middle ground, where there's no criminal stuff. Yeah, there's no criminal stuff, but he has people he's accountable to. And there's enough evidence that's been on the record for years to take administrative action in an employment context.
But I thought he did rape someone.
Well, there have been accusations. Nothing's been taken to court, is her point. Nothing's been taken to court. No one has been tried or convicted. They have taken administrative action as an employer can and will do. All right? Because they put protections in place that presumed not only that he had done that kind of thing in the past, but that he was going to keep doing it in the future. So when we talk about these things, we have to talk about context, right? Is it a social context, social media, community meeting, or is somebody making an actual allegation to the courts or to a police officer or to a mandated reporter? Right? I will talk about this all night long. The library's going to close and get this out. Thank you so much for coming in. If anybody else has any questions for me, please feel free to email me. Thank you again so much for coming.